So there's lots of raw food that you can find that it says raw on it in your high-end pet supply, for example. There's freezers full of raw foods. Are they all created equal? Well, they're not. In order to really be sold in a store, they have to go through some sort of process because the stores, the regulatory powers that be, do not want any bacteria or any contamination of any sort in that way in that food. They want a sterile product, which we find kind of laughable because kibble is not sterile.
Right. Now, there have never been any cases where they've proven any kind of human disease resulting from contact with raw pet food, but the FDA is, for lack of a better word, kind of rabid about this, and they love to shut down small pet food companies, whereas kibble is recalled for contamination pretty much all the time on a regular basis, and the FDA does not care. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Crunchy Carnivore Podcast with myself, Dr. Jessica Levy. Been a veterinarian for almost 29 years and exclusively holistic since 2010, however long that's been. Can't keep track.
16 years now.
Oh, wow.
There you go.
And my friend Melissa.
I'm Melissa Weidenhammer. I'm a certified canine nutritionist and a natural rumen breeder. And we love bringing holistic animal care information. We like to talk about different topics here. Anything having to do with how to navigate making more natural choices for your animals. And so today, we're going to talk about something that can be very confusing for people to navigate, or maybe some people aren't even aware that this is something that they really need to kind of dig into a little bit. So we're going to bring some things to light, maybe that you haven't thought of before, or maybe bring some clarity to things that you've heard. So we talk all the time here about the foundation of health for your dog is the diet. And we talk about the importance of feeding a raw food diet. And of course, doing it in a way that gives a variety of nutrients in a variety of different ways, and you create balance over time with different whole foods. But one thing that can be challenging is there's so many now. There's so many raw foods now, which is kind of a blessing and a curse.
Right.
Years ago when you and I started doing this, there was very few. It was not what it is today.
There was one.
There was one when you started.
Raw.
You started way before I did, but and so there's a lot of people jumping on this train, a lot of companies jumping on this train. Some are producing a really good raw food. Some, not so much. Kind of like supplements. It's not
Bit
so
of
great.
a Wild West out there.
It kind of is. And so how do you navigate this raw food roulette? How do you figure out what is really going to bring the benefit? You're going to the trouble, you're going to the expense, you're going to the, incorporating into your lifestyle, having the freezer space, all the things. How do we know that you're picking a food that is really going to deliver the nutrition and that foundation for health that you're really trying to achieve? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And really, I think where we want to start is the form of the food matters. And so what do we mean when we say the form of the food? You can find a lot of different pet foods that seem fresh food. They seem raw food, but they're not really raw. And so we have your actual raw food, which is what we talk about here all the time. It is raw meat, bone, organ, whole fruits, vegetables, fish, eggs. It is real food that is raw. It is moisture rich. It hasn't been messed with, all the things. Then you have freeze dried. Okay. Freeze dried is another form. Then you have air baked. Then you have dehydrated. Then you have gently cooked, right? There's all these options in all these different forms. And so we really want to talk about, does that really matter? Yes, form really matters.
Do you think, like, even nowadays at big box stores, you can find pet food in the refrigerator, right? It looks like meat, it has meat on the ingredient list, but it is actually a cooked product. And then just the other day, I had a conversation with a client who said that She had been to the grocery store and looked in the meat department, and there was nothing there that she could feed her dog. And so we're just trying to bring clarity to all these different options. I've had clients come in and present me with, I found this recipe for raw dog food on the internet, and the first ingredient is cooked hamburger. We are talking about raw food. There is no cooking involved.
Right.
Anything that is cooked, lightly cooked, oven baked, air dried, dehydrated, that is not raw food. Freeze drying, you could say there is some wiggle room there because from what Google tells us, the freeze drying process does not lose a lot of the nutrients. I am pretty confident that it loses fat in the process of freeze drying. It is the kind of thing where I probably wouldn't feed freeze dried as my base raw for my dogs, because when I have people come in with dogs and they're feeding raw, but it turns out they're actually feeding freeze dried, those dogs are not doing as well as the ones that are getting actual raw meat, bone, organs, etc. But I think freeze dried out of all of them has its place for travel. If you have somebody in your family who has to feed the dogs occasionally and it grosses them out, they can't handle the raw food, they can't deal with it, whatever, and it's great for treats.
I love using it for treats.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite things to use for treats.
Yeah.
The other problem with freeze dried, it does retain it really does retain a tremendous amount of the nutritional content. It does not. It hinders it very, very little. But the fact is that if there is too much fat in that protein, it messes with the freeze drying process. And so they tend to not use those proteins that are going to be higher in fat. You know, I don't know, maybe your pork.
Or they would remove most of the fat.
Or they would
before
use a
going
leaner.
through the freeze drying process.
And we've talked before when we talk about diet, fat is important. And so, if you're going to use something like freeze dried, just know it's completely devoid of moisture. So you're going to want to hydrate it with something, hopefully with some more nutritional benefit, like a broth or a goat's milk or something like that. And you're really going to want to bring some fat back in there because it doesn't work very well with the freeze drying process. And you're probably really not going to find much in there, and their bodies need fat. So as far as these other options, so really so we want a moisture-rich raw food. Okay, so there's lots of raw food that you can find it says raw on it in your high-end pet supply, for example. There's freezers full of raw foods. Are they all created equal? Well, they're not. In order to really be sold in a store, they have to go through some sort of process because the stores, the regulatory powers that be, do not want any bacteria or any contamination of any sort in that way in that food. They want a sterile product, which we find kind of laughable because kibble is not sterile.
Right. Now, there have never been any cases where they've proven any kind of human disease resulting from contact with raw pet food, but the FDA is, for lack of a better word, kind of rabid about this, and they love to shut down small pet food companies, whereas kibble is recalled for contamination pretty much all the time on a regular basis, and the FDA does not care. But right away, they already perceive raw pet food as bad and dangerous.
So there's processes to make these particular raw foods that are packaged and sold in pet supply stores a sterile product. You can also find raw pet foods at local suppliers or some online suppliers that is not sterile. It is truly raw. It has all the enzymes, all the bacteria, all the things that you would find in raw meat from the grocery store, which is actually ideal. And we'll go into that in a little bit. But let's talk about, is there really a problem with serving your dog something that is a sterile food? Like, okay, so the bacteria is gone. It doesn't really, super denature the food. We've done some research on that. So a very common process that you will see used with raw pet food is HPP, which is high pressure pasteurization. There's a few other options. Sometimes fermentation is used, which is a wonderful option. As long as your dog doesn't have too much of a histamine response, you might want to worry about fermented foods that way. But fermentation actually increases bioavailability of food. So fermentation is a great option.
Fermentation is like when you age a steak.
Or you'll think of fermented vegetables, think of your sauerkraut, those types of things. So fermentation is actually a great option. Citric acid wash or a meat wash is also something that can be used to sterilize raw pet food. Is there really a problem with a sterile raw food? We think there is.
Yeah, it's going to end up causing some issues, which might not be seen immediately as gut issues, but everything relates back to the microbiome. And so the first time I saw this was I had a client who had 2 little dogs. She had fed them raw food forever, and wherever she went in the country, she would just go to a pet food store, buy them frozen raw food, and then that's what they ate for many years. And then at some point, as they got older, they became less friendly, less social. They didn't even want to go for walks anymore. Instead of hanging out with her, they would be someplace else in her living space, kind of separating from her. And I said to her, just as an experiment, stop feeding them that. Let's just go to the grocery store. The grocery store is allowed to sell you meat that has bacteria in it because the grocery store is thinking a human is going to take this home and cook it.
Right.
So that's why it does not have to be bacteria free. So we switched her dogs to stuff from the grocery store, from the meat department, not pet food, and it rejuvenated them. Like they were revived, they became friendly again, they wanted to go for walks again. They felt better, and they lived several more years eating stuff from the grocery store. So this kind of treatment, even though the internet is telling us that, oh, it's not really harmful, there's not really loss of nutrients. So basically, instead of doing a heat pasteurization, because that would cook the product, these companies are introducing so much pressure that it will pop the cell walls of bacteria. So that's how high pressure pasteurization gets rid of all the possible bacteria that might be lurking in there. Is it going to damage protein molecules? Yes. So they were telling us, the internet was telling us that there's loss of, there's changes in texture, changes in color. Does it do something to the flavor? I don't know. We're not going to know.
Yeah, and so really the big takeaway when you're looking at, really how much does HPP change the food and what do you need to look for when you're looking at HPP? The key is temperature. So if they use a colder water temperature in their HPP process and there is a shorter hold time in that process, you're going to denature the food the least amount. And the protein, I think, was at 96% bioavailability. And the fat, I think, was at like 94%. I mean, it really didn't do a whole lot to denature the food as long as it was kept in a short hold time with a colder temperature, water being used.
And they were talking about anything from like 2 minutes to 45 minutes or something.
Yeah, the 45 minutes was a lot.
Quite a range in there. And then also the temperature of the water varied quite a bit. So 45 degrees Celsius to 60 degrees Celsius.
The biggest thing that stood out to me with what was affected by the HPP that is a little frustrating if you were going to use it is that it compromises certain like produce that might be in there that's high in antioxidants. It reduces that by at least like 20% the bioavailability. And so that's kind of frustrating. You got your organic blueberries or your organic broccoli or whatever is in that raw food, and just know that if it goes through any HPP process, even the better version with the shorter hold time and the colder water, you're going to lose some value in that antioxidant.
And then if you think about, some of the meat washes that some companies are using, so I've heard of like an apple cider vinegar meat wash or apple cider vinegar and hydrogen peroxide. And I know when people contact the CDC, even on the CDC website, for humans, they do not recommend washing meat. They're very against it. But because there's so much fear about some sort of imaginary contamination from raw pet food, and so raw pet food companies are at risk of kind of having a target painted on them by the FDA. And kind of once they start coming after you, apparently you kind of end up being railroaded into HPP or some other kind of bacterial control measure that they fear you're not doing enough of.
Yep. Which is really, I mean, so, we're not here demonizing any company that does HPP because we understand why.
Right.
And quite
Right.
frankly, it is still far better than feeding, a kibble or something
Or
like
a
that.
cooked food.
Or a cooked food.
For sure.
Yes, for sure. So, like, the punchline for this is, if you buy prepackaged from a store that is raw pet food, just know that it went through some type of process to make it sterile. Are there times where we would use HPP foods? As long as we make sure that it's done with that more responsible process, right? Shorter hold time, cold water processing, and some companies are very transparent about that. We do HPP this type of way. I think HPP food has its place. I think it is a great introductory. It's a great. Most people including myself, most people start with a commercially made raw food. It is just the least overwhelming and the easiest way to start feeding raw. HPP, even if it's done through HPP, it's a great option for that reason. If you're going to have a pet sitter, if you're going to have your animal boarded, they're so conveniently made. They're in patties, they're in nuggets, and it's like you feed this many, whatever. And I even like having it sometimes in variety. If I know it's a higher quality food, even if it's been put through a process like that, I will give my dogs that for variety, but I usually make sure to put something else in the bowl that I know is actually raw, that's going to have the enzymes, that's going to have the bacteria, because I don't want them to lose that benefit in their gut either. Or if I do a whole meal of it, I'm certainly not going to do it 2 days in a row or something like that.
Right. Essentially, eating a sterile diet is not to your dog's benefit.
Right.
Here and there, not the end of the world. And you can certainly have some of that in the dish and have other stuff in there as well that does have bacteria in it, like the rest of our food that we buy at the grocery store.
And so just know that if you want to use, if you found a food you really love, there's a couple that we actually really like. They're made very, very well. And you want to do it long term and you're switching out their proteins and all that, just know that you're going to want to add in raw whole food, foods every once in a while in their food, just so that they're getting that beneficial bacteria, keeping the pH of their gut the way that it should be, giving them the full benefit to their physical and mental health. So that's kind of what we would say as far as that goes.
Because the bacteria in the microbiome, they have to be replenished constantly. Other things about raw foods, you still have to read the ingredients. And so if you're buying a pre-mixed raw pet food, you still need to read the entire list of ingredients. There are cruddy pre-mixed raw pet foods out there, and some of them have all the synthetic vitamins and minerals that you find in kibble, which is not to your dog's advantage. We don't recommend feeding those. Some of them have some unnecessary fillers, like I'll see flaxseed in there sometimes, or quinoa or oats, or those don't really have any place in dog food. Every now and then, if you have a dog who's not particularly sensitive, it's probably not going to make a huge difference. But on the whole, we really want to see a very limited ingredient list. And also, because we're paying a lot for this product, we're going to put it on the scale. That's how we're deciding how much to feed. And so if it turns out that a large proportion of the food is the extras, all the veggies, the fruit, the blah, then your math is going to be fuzzy and it's going to be hard to tell how much you actually need to feed. And so what I find in practice is that dogs who are being fed certain brands of premixed raw pet food need more. They are hungrier because the amount of meat, bone, and organ is less than it would be. I will say too, like the prepackaged raw pet foods, those are 80-10-10 blends. So they're 80% meat, 10% bone, 10% organ. What animal on the planet has those proportions? Nobody. So what happened was with the 80-10-10 thing, when I first started to see that in raw feeding, I thought, what is this? And when I did some research, I found that those are the proportions that some researcher found that a wolf eats when they first make a fresh kill. So this is like Christmas every day. But the bottom line is that those are the proportions that a wolf would eat, like right off the top, fresh kill. They're going to consume a portion that is 80% meat, 10% bone, 10% organ. 5 days later, when they're still eating off of the same carcass and there's nothing left but bones, they're going to be eating 100% bone that day.
Right.
And also, our dogs, even though some of them are super cute and fluffy, it's not good for us to feed them like they're too precious. Our dogs are here to eat the gristle, the guts, the tendons, the ligaments, the bones, the eyeballs and the teeth, and they eat all the parts of the animals. And so for us to feed them like only the very best every day, we're kind of doing them a disservice. And so these proportions, I think, are kind of an ideal, but you don't have to try to meet those at every meal every day.
And so something else to keep in mind, we're talking about how ingredients matter when you're looking at even raw pet foods. Really watching that you're not doing too many combination blends is another problem that I see. When you see, some sort of a raw pet food that has beef, chicken, and turkey in it, you're getting some parts of the beef, some parts of the chicken, some parts of the turkey. You're not getting all the benefits as if it was that whole animal. And so you're missing out on really important nutrients if you do only a combination food all the time. So when we look at things like that, maybe you use a combination mix every once in a while, but really your focus should be on single protein mixes. So if I have the choice between a mix of beef, chicken, and turkey, or I have the choice of getting a beef blend, a chicken blend, a turkey blend, I'm gonna go for those single protein sources because they're getting beef muscle meat, organ, and bone. They're getting chicken muscle meat, organ, and bone. Each of those different things accomplishes something different in their system. And so just be careful, be a little leery of doing too much of those blends. Sometimes they're great, especially when you can get unique proteins.
Right.
I mean, rabbit is excellent for them. It's also one of the most expensive. So I know one of our favorite raw food manufacturers, they have blends that have, maybe beef and rabbit. Right. And so it's a little more cost effective because you're able to have, some beef and some rabbit.
Right.
But for the most part, you really, really want to hone in on single protein sources.
Right. And so some of that too is having variety in the diet.
Right.
And so if you eat beef, chicken, turkey today and beef, chicken, turkey tomorrow and beef, chicken, turkey every day, that's not actually a varied diet because you're eating the same thing every day.
And you're setting yourself up for allergies and all sorts of other stuff.
Right. I think too, like with some of these foods, some of the raw pet foods use organic produce in their products, which is very nice. If you're able to buy organic fruits and veggies, if you want to add those to your dog food, obviously organic is better. And then there's the whole list of the dirty dozen fruits and veggies.
Sure.
And so it is really important for some of those, I think, to avoid the non-organic ones.
And then just to piggyback on that, I've looked at a lot of different raw food brands as I'm helping clients, what are they currently feeding and, how can we improve the diet? And what I really love to see is when we find a raw food company that each protein source, if they put produce, if they put extra foods added in with it, that it's different depending on the protein.
Yeah.
So, you're going to have a variety of fruits and veggies in the beef blend that's going to be different than the variety of fruits and veggies in the chicken blend that's going to be different than the variety. There are companies that they pay very close attention. They understand the importance of variety. And so there are raw food companies where it is the exact same fruit and veggie and vitamin mix in every single protein, and there's maybe only 3 proteins available. That's also a problem. You should have 5 to 10 different proteins in rotation, however that looks, however that works out.
Right,
for you.
but rotation does kind of mean that you want to set yourself up so that you can change the protein every day, every 2 days, every 3 days. I think 3 to 4 days is kind of the outside of how long it's going to be good for in the fridge, and then you need to move on. and move on and move on. And so with that kind of variety, I know we've hashed this out in other videos.
Right.
So chicken, turkey, chicken, beef, chicken, pork is not actually,
No.
you're still overfeeding chicken.
Yep. Yep. And
So,
you really
yeah.
should go heavier on the red meats than the poultry. There's a couple of different things
Yep.
that you should kind of know in and around there. But especially with how often to switch out variety, it is extremely important with puppies that you do it more often. So adults, you can cheat that a little bit more. You can spread it out a little bit more. Puppies, they need that switch. They need that
Even for
switch.
adults, I would say no longer than a week on one protein, or you start to introduce problems. So there are raw pet food companies that only operate online. They're only in the internetiverse. So when you order from them, those companies, at least as far as we can tell, are not using HPP. And they are very careful in how they handle the product, and they ship it frozen. And so those also are a great option for either proteins that you can't find at your local pet food store, or just to get more variety of products and get some stuff that hasn't been treated in one of these ways.
So just make sure you do your due diligence. It just depends on the company whether they use some sort of processing or not. I have seen certain online ones where they still do use HPP. And again, we don't want to demonize every company that uses HPP, but when you're really trying to go for the full benefit of raw food, if you can avoid HPP, you want to.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. And then companies should be open about where they are getting their ingredients from. And there is a wide variety there as well. So basically, if they're not using HPP or some form of meat wash, essentially the meat and produce has to be human grade. Which is a benefit. Like, we want to feed our dogs, like I said, it doesn't have to be super pretty, it doesn't have to be the best cuts of meat, but we want to feed them something that is not chemically treated or damaged in a way that would make us not want to eat it. So,
Yeah, human grade, organic, grass-fed, pasture-raised, all of those things are just going to enhance the nutrient profile. They're going to make it more bioavailable. I mean, if you do a little bit of research on the difference between factory farmed beef liver versus grass-fed organic beef liver, the nutrient profile, it's off the charts different. So, we understand that everybody has to do what fits into their budget and their lifestyle, but there are certain things that it's like, if you can splurge a little bit more on a little bit higher quality of, how the meat is sourced, it really can make all the difference. There have even been dogs in our experience where they're eating, a standard raw, beef blend, and they're throwing up and they can't keep it down. And then we're like, hold on, let's try a better quality meat, right? Let's try a better quality source of beef, and the dogs are fine.
Yeah.
So it really, as much as you can, ingredients matter, sourcing matters, where the meat comes from, how it's raised matters,
how it's been handled.
how it's been handled, how has it been processed. All those things are kind of things to think about.
Some of the online suppliers, some of our local bulk suppliers, and I'm assuming bulk raw suppliers in other states, when you're purchasing raw food from them, it might not have a whole lot of processing. They might not be doing HPP or some other kind of weird wash. And they're also not adding fruits and veggies. And that, I think, is sometimes advantageous. So, like you were saying, unless you can find a company that's putting different fruits and veggies in with different proteins, just for the sake of variety, you can still end up overfeeding the same fruits and veggies.
Right.
And so there are advantages to using straight meat, bone, and organs so that you can add your own extras. You don't need to add these things every day. Fruits and veggies are not available every day of the year in real life where the dog is designed to exist. But it's nice to be able to handle that part of it yourself. I'm a big fan of good quality table scraps. That is an easy way for us to broaden the repertoire of things that our dogs are putting in their mouths so that we can support the variety of bacteria in the gut microbiome. basically, if the more varied a diet you eat, the happier your bacteria are going to be. And the easier it will be for you to get through those times when maybe you do put something in your mouth that has been HPP'd.
It's true. That's
right?
true.
And that allows you to kind of skate over those times when you do have to use, or when you choose, maybe it's a unique protein that you can't get anyplace else or something like that, when you do choose to use a food that has been treated in some manner to eliminate bacteria. Honestly, I think if this was such a great concern, one of the things we saw was that the FDA was concerned about your dog eating its raw food and then licking your child's face. They would make little doggy straitjackets to prevent them from licking their own butts and then licking your child's face, which 100% they do. So we're okay with that. And I will say, like, I have dogs, a couple of my dogs have fluffy faces with the beards and the mustaches and all this stuff, and they don't have food stuck to their faces when they're done eating, no matter what I feed them. Do I let them lick my face? No, because I don't like that stuff anyway. But I don't see like food lingering in their whiskers or getting stuck on their face. I don't know. Do you wipe your dog's faces after they eat?
Well, I do, but they're bulldogs and they're slobbery and they're messy, and I'm kind of a clean freak, so I do wipe their faces with paper towels.
Oh,
I just always have.
So if you have a dog with a certain face shape, or maybe like a big drooler, like a Newfie or something like that, but those people have the spit towel anyway.
Yeah.
If you come in my office with a Newfie and you don't have a spit towel, like you were not a real Newfie owner.
So I think, really the big takeaway here is be aware about, is it really raw food? Or is what you're feeding really raw? Is what you're feeding a sterile raw food or a truly raw food? Make sure that, if it is a sterile raw food, it's kind of kept in its place, and that's maybe not all that you're leaning on, or certainly not for long term. If you're using it for the first few months as you're getting used to raw feeding, absolutely, that's a wonderful way to use that. And so, and then, when you're getting into actually how to select what types of each, brand, you want to think variety and those times when you have options that there is, those single source proteins over those combos, and you have a lot more control about how much is happening, how much different variety your dog is getting. I do really like to lean on those single protein sources without veggies mixed in and stuff, because then I can do my own thing in variety in my own way, and I know that it's varied. And so, as far as anything outside of that, we could really get into the weeds of, how do you feed a raw diet? And, it's so overwhelming, and don't you have to balance every bowl? That's probably a different conversation. We made a raw feeding guide for that. We certainly do talk about that, in different areas, but just know that, the type of raw food that you pick, the quality of the ingredients, where it's sourced, all these different factors, you could be doing yourself a massive disservice, throwing a lot of money down the toilet if you don't do your research and do some due diligence on what you're choosing and how it's processed and how it's sourced and all of those different kinds of things. So it's just, it's a little bit more mental work on the front end, but it's going to pay off in dividends.
Well, and I don't think it takes a tremendous amount of time. Like, you don't have to meet everybody at the company or know their ins and outs. It's just basically read the ingredients.
Go to the website.
Go look on their website. See what they
Websites are
say
great.
about, whether they know people are interested in these things. So we found a lot of it is in the FAQ, where are they doing HPP? Are they using some sort of bacterial control? They'll tell you.
Yep, they absolutely will. We hope this brings some clarity and some, a little bit more of a magnifying glass on the different raw foods and the way that they're made and the way they're produced and the way they're sources. It matters. What form that comes in, it matters. So hopefully it sheds some light on that. It maybe brings some clarity or or even just explains it for the first time, that not all raw food is created equal, and it can make a big difference. As you kind of move through your journey and reassess, or maybe as you're about to get started, hopefully these tips and tricks will be helpful. We're going to put some things down in the description box to kind of guide you on, different ways to look at some of the websites or things like that. Tune in next time for another one of our Country Coffee episodes where we have somebody else on, and we're going to talk about some interesting insights into someone who went from conventional to holistic, and really how she brought triumph out of tragedy. So stay tuned for that episode next time, and we'll see you again on the Crunchy Carnivore podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Our goal is always to encourage others to seek out the holistic approach by way of education and empowerment. You can check out our online resources at wellspringhaa.com. You can follow us on our YouTube channel, Wellspring Holistic Animal Academy, and you can also find us on Instagram at wellspring_HAA. We hope that this has been helpful and that you continue with us on your journey to holistic health for your pets. As always, we're here to be unapologetically all natural.